We've made it to part 6 of our 7-part sermon series on our Unitarian Universalist 7 principles. Today we examine our goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Can we just add ice cream to that list? If we tack it on at the end, I promise you no one will notice. So then our goal would be world community with peace, liberty, justice, and ice cream for all. And I mean, while we're at it, maybe add rainbows and unicorns and fluffy little bunnies with bow ties. The goal of the 6th principle is ambitious, to say the least. A truly authentic world community in which every single person has equal access to peace, liberty, and justice. That's a daunting task, especially considering that we UUs can barely pull off a successful potluck around here. It's very hard to feed UUs. To believe that we can actually achieve that goal, well, it would take some bravado, some willful naivete, a little chutzpah, maybe a good word to capture the spirit of all of those ideas is hope. Ours is a faith of hope. Perhaps the most famous Unitarian Universalist theologian is a gentleman by the name of James Luther Adams. Adams once wrote that hope must be considered one of the key characteristics of liberal religion, which our faith, of course, is an expression of. Liberalism, according to Adams, holds that the resources, divine and human, that are available for the achievement of meaningful change justify an attitude of ultimate optimism. Ultimate optimism. So we are a faith of hope. That's in our theological bones. But that hope is hard. It is a struggle. Because every day when I take a look at this world, my eyes and my ears and my rational mind tell me that we are frankly beyond hope. It is over for us as a human race. We squandered our time on this planet with petty bickering and hurting each other with little remorse, and we are soon to be extinct, victims of a destruction that we have frankly brought upon ourselves. If I were to be granted the honor of crafting the epitaph for the collective headstone of humanity, I would write that we were a nasty, brutish, selfish, and cruel species whose advancements in technology too quickly outpaced the evolution of our morality, and we earned our fate. But the values of my Unitarian Universalist faith won't let me believe that. And my UU values certainly won't allow me to live like that. My UU faith compels me to live with hope, because this faith has faith in our collective future. We believe that in the end, love wins, even when every other rational and objective indicator suggests otherwise. Honestly, I have to admit that this hard hope of UUism sometimes makes me miss the days back when I personally was an evangelical Christian. In some ways, it was easier, because according to the conservative and literalist Christian theology that I was personally raised in, it frankly didn't matter what happened in this world or to this world. God was going to scrap this world. The whole thing was going to go up in flames, and then there would be a new heaven and a new earth. In other words, as it related to this physical world, this earth, my old Christianity had a theology of repeal and replace. But my Unitarian Universalist theology tells me, you don't have the votes. Ha 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 ha. So we'd better fix what we've got. For us Unitarian Universalists, our first priority is taking care of this world. So with our unbridled hope, our ultimate optimism, we set a goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Let's unpack that a bit, please. World community. What on earth, so to speak, would that look like? We need a vision to guide us. So what should that vision be? Do we have any models? Now, if you've listened to me preach over the past few years, you may already be guessing my personal suggestion. Gene Roddenberry had a vision of the future. In Roddenberry's Star Trek, our world, the Earth, finally comes together to form a real community. Earth achieves peace with itself, and with that peace comes prosperity in a post-capitalist, post-scarcity economic system, which then fuels our ability to advance our technology and propel ourselves into space, the final frontier. And one of the most important aspects of Roddenberry's future utopia, an aspect that makes my little UU heart sing, is that although the Earth is finally unified, it is not unified through colonialism or cultural assimilation. Assimilation, as anyone who is a fan of The Next Generation knows, is one of the great evils of Roddenberry's universe. In Roddenberry's future, unity is achieved by embracing diversity. Remember that the crew of the original Enterprise, first depicted on American television screens back in the 1960s, included both male and female officers from Japan, Russia, Scotland, Kenya, and a biracial science officer from the planet Vulcan. Now, the fact that they all answered to an ill-tempered, white, hetero, cisgendered American male, prone to acts of borderline sexual harassment of alien species, is of course beside the point. It was a beautiful utopia, except for that last part. But the problem with all utopias is that they are heartbreakers. We humans have never been able to create a real one, even a small model for any extended time. They are terribly unsustainable. And frankly, as it stands right now, our world appears to be light years away from anything Roddenberry envisioned. We live in a world now of ever-weakening global alliances. We find ourselves alienating our traditional allies across the world while simultaneously rattling our sabers in front of our enemies. We are building walls across borders, exploiting and expanding fears of brown-skinned immigrants, otherizing the Muslim world. Right now, I fear that the collective future of humanity looks less like the USS Enterprise and more like the RMS Titanic. But my faith compels me back to hope. And that hope keeps me moving forward no matter what. And, imaginary though it may be, a utopic vision like Gene Roddenberry's world community can act as a North Star to help guide our steps even if we know that we can't ever actually reach it. Now, I believe the actual path itself to world community lies in the second half of our sixth principle. That is a path of peace, liberty, and justice for all. So let us take a closer look at those three big, vague, important, and idealistic words. I'm going to take them out of order, and I'm going to start with justice, simply because I can move past it quickly. I already defined and addressed justice earlier in this sermon series back when we discussed our second principle, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. If you'd like to hear my thoughts on that subject, I encourage you to go to our website and watch the video or download the podcast. The point worth noting today regarding justice vis-a-vis Unitarian Universalism is this. Of all the big, vague, important, and idealistic words that run throughout our 7 principles, one and only one appears twice: justice. I cannot believe for a moment that that was some kind of mistake or coincidence. As a religious people, we UUs thirst for justice. If there is a single word besides love that anchors our faith, surely it must be justice. And I think that our sixth principle rightly implies that there can be no authentic community, worldwide or otherwise, where there is not also justice. Peace, said Tybalt de Benvolio, I hate the word. I kind of hate it too, the word, that is, because the word has too many definitions. So I can never really be sure what we're talking about. Of all the big, vague, important, and idealistic words in our principles, this might be the vaguest. Are we talking about peace in the anti-war sense? If so, that's certainly a worthy ideal that deserves a good, long conversation. Whatever your personal philosophy on the subject may be, whether you are a pacifist or a just war theorist, I think that most people of conscience, at least those who are paying attention, would agree that there is far too much war in the world today. Too many battles, too much collateral damage, too much needless bloodshed. On Friday, the New York Times reported that as many as 200 civilians had been killed in the most recent airstrikes in Mosul in northern Iraq. If that number is confirmed, it would rank among the highest civilian death tolls in an American air mission since the United States went to war in Iraq way back in 2003. For those keeping track, that was 14 years ago. As a nation, we are still fighting wars in both Afghanistan and Iraq, wars co-signed by both major American political parties, executed by presidents from both sides of the aisle. Sadly, war is one of the very few things that can still foster broad bipartisan support in this country. And even as the halo around President Barack Obama continues to shine brighter each day since leaving office, let us not forget that as president, Obama authorized hundreds of drone strikes of dubious legality, which killed dozens, possibly hundreds of civilians and children. The Syrian civil war is now 6 years old. It has resulted in 400,000 deaths. It has displaced 11 million people from their homes. It is the largest humanitarian crisis we have faced since World War II. There are ongoing armed conflicts all across the world, including Africa and Asia, which result in thousands of deaths each year that we rarely ever hear about. And of course, 9 nations have nuclear arsenals. There are over 16,000 nuclear weapons in the world today that we know of. The funny thing is, ask just about anyone and they will tell you that they want peace. And they probably do. Even leaders of nations bent on world domination ultimately want peace after they have used war to expand the borders of their empire. About the only people who might want war simply for the sake of war are the profiteers, stakeholders in the sprawling global military-industrial complex, but they are a minority. I guess what I'm getting at is, if you took a poll asking people if they like the idea of peace in all of its beautiful abstractness, the numbers would be astoundingly high, far higher than you might expect considering how many wars we human beings are actually fighting. So if everybody wants it, why no peace? To understand that, I think the real questions we need to ask and answer are, how do we agree to best achieve peace? What are we all willing to sacrifice to get peace? And ultimately, who has the power to decide? Now, to answer those questions, I would need another sermon series, like an 85-part sermon series. And that's for just one kind of peace. What if the sixth principle is actually talking about another kind of peace? Inner peace. That state of deep serenity, tranquility, enlightenment that follows an intense experience of ecstasy or transcendence, or is cultivated over time through spiritual disciplines like prayer, meditation, or yoga. That kind of peace, or some interpretation of it, appears in cultures, philosophies, and religions all across the world. It may be known as shanti, shalom, salam, ataraxia, nirvana, Gelassenheit, self-actualization, the peace that passeth all understanding. We could easily do another 85-part series on that kind of peace as well. But as dissimilar as these two kinds of peace are, perhaps you're thinking, like I am, that there must be some relationship between them. Perhaps the spiritual peace cultivated within the hearts of individuals can ultimately lead to peace between the nations. And if you are thinking that, as Tyler informed us earlier today, you are in good company. Such a causal relationship has been suggested by several noted thinkers, from the Dalai Lama to Lao Tzu. Now, these are two very worthy conceptualizations of peace as it relates to our faith, but I need to address a third understanding of peace that often gets thrown around in these kinds of conversations. To be honest, it is a superficial kind of peace that is often cited as a goal for an equally superficial kind of spirituality. This faux peace prizes the absence of any kind of discomfort, struggle, or conflict. It exalts intra and interpersonal harmony and a lack of any turbulence whatsoever as the universe's highest moral good. It is a facile and tragically shallow understanding of the word peace, almost as facile and tragically shallow as defining the word love as simply warm, fuzzy feelings or being nice to everybody. To achieve true peace, sometimes we have to blow up that faux peace, and certainly the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. thought so. Back in 1955, during the Montgomery bus boycott, Dr. King was accused of disturbing the peace. Instead of disputing that charge, he responded with the famous words, "True peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice." A so-called peace that perpetuates oppression by coercing victims and activists to stop rocking the boat is no peace at all. Dr. King's statement forces us to recognize that there is sometimes an inverse relationship between peace and justice, and whichever kind of peace we're talking about, avoidance of military conflict, spiritual tranquility, or interpersonal harmony, it behooves us to ask ourselves, just how much peace are we allowed to enjoy when there is still so much injustice in the world? Or to put it another way, just how much injustice are we willing to suffer in order to keep our peace? We are left to discuss liberty. I don't have enough time to do justice to that word. Liberty, like our other big, vague, important, and idealistic words, can mean so many different things. Spiritually speaking, it can denote the ability to act freely, unencumbered by one's own fears and desires. Politically, it can mean the freedom to act without state coercion. And some persuasively argue that such liberty requires more than just freedom from state coercion, but necessitates an actual ability or agency to act as one wishes, which would require that certain basic economic conditions be met for all people. Very broadly speaking, then, three great threats to liberty could be personal desire, an expansive government, and industrial capitalism. For liberty to prosper, all three must be tempered. Some might argue completely destroyed, at least if you're an especially militaristic anarcho-Buddhist. As it relates to socio-political liberty and freedom from oppression, I find the following excerpted words again from MLK's and his Nobel Peace Prize address to be valuable. These words were spoken in 1964, but I believe they may be just as applicable today. At least that is my earnest hope. Dr. King said, "What we are seeing now is a freedom explosion. The deep rumbling of discontent that we hear today is the thunder of disinherited masses, rising from dungeons of oppression to the bright hills of freedom. The great masses of people are determined to end the exploitation of their races and land. They are awake and moving toward their goal like a tidal wave. You can hear them rumbling in every village street, on the docks, in the houses, among the students, in the churches, and at political meetings. These developments should not surprise any student of history. Oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. The yearning for freedom eventually manifests itself. The Bible tells the thrilling story of how Moses stood in Pharaoh's court centuries ago and cried, 'Let my people go.' This is a kind of opening chapter in a continuing story. The present struggle in the United States is a later chapter in the same unfolding story. If you want to be part of this continuing story of collective liberation, I urge you to support the work of iCare. Join us tomorrow evening and help us make this a city with peace, liberty, and justice for all. As we've discussed a great deal today, our sixth principle has many big words, but I would argue that the most important words are the two small ones that appear at the very, very end. For all. Right now, neither peace, nor liberty, nor justice are accessible to our homeless. Right now, neither peace, nor liberty, nor justice are afforded to our children, disproportionately black children, who are being fed into the gaping mouth of a sprawling prison industrial complex that has been built on bare naked racism. To show up, to rise up in solidarity with our homeless and our children at risk is not an act of altruism or charity. It is very much an act of self-interest. As Dr. King reminded us, we are, each of us, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. In a democratic system such as ours, when we make the political choice to allow homelessness to exist, to allow children to be thrown into jail, we must each bear some measure of responsibility for the human suffering that our decisions have created or perpetuated. When we recognize this hard truth, I believe that our faith compels each of us, as the Apostle Paul put it, to work out our own salvation with fear and trembling. Because we, the privileged, we bear our own chains as well. And as civil rights activist Fannie Lou Hamer once rightly observed, nobody's free until everybody is free. I invite you to join us in the fight for peace, justice, and liberty for all. Blessed be.